We're continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Hilchot Shabbat, Siman Rish, Sadi Aleph. We're up to Seif Bet, the halachot of Seudah Shlishit. We already mentioned in Seif Aleph how important Seudah Shlishit is. One of the handful times that the Shulchan Aruch says me'od, very much. You have to be careful. Yeheh zahir me'od lekayem Seudah Shlishit. You have to be very careful to fulfill the chovah, the obligation of Seudah Shlishit. We spoke about the different details of how much of obligation it is. Perhaps a safek is applied to it when a person misses retzeva chalitzenu, and the minimum amount a person should eat is lechatchila kabetza, but even a kazayit would do. And we mentioned that the person should lechatchila, especially in the winter time, chacham enav berosho, plan ahead of the time properly to be able to leave enough room for Seudah Shlishit. Now we are going to discuss the time of Seudah Shlishit. Zemanah, says the Shulchan Aruch, Mishiyagia, Zemana mincha, dahainu mishashaot mechasel mala. The time of Seudah Shlishit starts earliest from 6.5 hours, which is the time, the earliest time for mincha gedolah. If you eat Seudah earlier than that, says the Shulchan Aruch, ve'im asa'ah kodem lachen, Lo kiyem mitzvah Seudah Shlishit. You have not fulfilled the obligation of Seudah Shlishit. You would have to eat again. To which the Rama adds, Yesh omrim da'asur lishtot mayim ben mincha le'ma'ariv b'Shabbat. These are a series of very interesting concepts in halacha that the Rama brings. There are those who say a person should not be drinking between mincha and arvit of Shabbat. This has Kabbalistic reasons, nothing of pshat, because there is the time that the neshamot who have been spared from Gehinam because of Shabbat, Gehinam is not operational, are going back, or getting ready to go back to their unfortunate fate in Gehinam. And because you can't drink, you also can't eat, because eating brings to drinking. So there is a shita in halacha because of this Kabbalistic conceptual thing that forbids to eat Seudah Shlishit after mincha, between mincha and arvit. And the opposing shita, which is the minhag, and we follow that, says the Rama, there are others who disagree. On the contrary, it's better to daven first mincha, and then, and only then, have Seudah Shlishit. This is the Rambam too, Ragal Mordechai, many others as well. Ve'chen nohagim, says the Rama, that is the prevalent, accepted custom, the minhag. Bechol medinot elu, in all of our countries. Now, Kabbalistically speaking, says the Zohar HaKadosh, Ari HaKadosh, Kaf Chaim brings this as a psak halacha, the Maran Chida, and many others, that a person should bedavka specifically eat Seudah Shlishit only after having davened mincha. So therefore, that is certainly the practice for the Sfaradim as well, says the Mishna Berura, Mishesh Shaot Umechetze, this that the time starts from 6.5 hours. How about if I started before and then it hit the 6.5 hours and I ate a little kazait, a little something afterwards as well? Says the Mishna Berura, it's fine. If that happened, yatsa, you have fulfilled your obligation, even though that you started your Seudah earlier on, because at the end of the day, you did eat also, at least the kazait of bread, after the time had already arrived. We do not necessarily follow the beginning, we follow the fact that you ate enough to be considered Seudah after the time of the Seudah had already arrived. Now, the Mishna Berura says, speaking about this Kabbalistic concept that the Rama brought, Now the person should not be eating Suda, drinking, because these neshamot are returning to their punishment, or whatever that concept of Gehenam means for them. Itabe Midrash, he explains, the source of this is actually from a Midrashic source. Kol hashote mayim b'Shabbat b'nashmashot kilu gozel kerovav hametim. If you drink water b'nashmashot of Shabbat afternoon, you're stealing from the deceased relatives that now they are going to be returning in a hasty way before their actual time to their punishment of Gehenam. So that's like as if you're stealing from them. Again, this is beyond my pay grade, and certainly beyond the scope of this this little talk, this little shiur. So therefore we'll leave that as it is, especially considering that this is not the minhag, both for Ashkenazim and for the Sfaradim. The Rama adds also another concept over here of the prohibition against drinking from the neharot, the rivers. V'chol shken sha'ar mashkin, the Shari says the Rama, and en lishtot mayim min neharot, you should not be drinking water from the rivers, but you could do from a source of water at home, and certainly other drinks you could do as well. But there are those who say this is only for the 12-month period of mourning on a person's father or mother. So therefore we will kind of leave this. Also, this really goes together with the other midrash of drinking water between in Ben Hashmashot of Shabbat afternoon. This is qualifying that this is only from the neharot, from the rivers, so it makes it even less applicable nowadays that people are not drinking directly from rivers. You have a faucet, a water system, and so on. So the whole thing is much less applicable. Seif Gimel, Maran writes, Im nimshecha seudat haboker at shegia zman hamincha, if your seudah was elongated in the morning of Shabbat until the time of mincha has arrived, which means half hour after chatzot, after the halachic midday. Says Shulchan, if the day is short and you want to in one shot be yotzeh seudah shniya and seudah shlishit, what you could do is bench in the middle, make hesachadat, take your mind off of it, go daven mincha or whatever. Then you wash again, ve'itol yadav, ve'ivarech birkat hamotzi, ve'isod, and you continue your original seudah, and that will be considered with the new hamotzi, and that would be considered seudah shlishit for you, says the Shulchan Aruch. Ve'nachon hadavar, this is a proper practice, shem lo haya oseh ken, because if you don't do that, once your seudah has been elongated so long that now is 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, lo haya yachol le'echol achar kach ela achila gasa. Then how in 2 hours you're going to eat another seudah? It's very difficult. You're full, and eating achila gasa, eating when you're completely full and you have no appetite, is not a proper thing to do. So for Shulchan says that's an itzah. Now, halachically speaking, as we alluded to it, this causes a lot of complexities and calls for expertise in halacha to be able to maneuver these two seudot without getting into safek bracha lehakel and a scenario that you're causing gorem lebracha she'ena sricha, because if you're in the middle of seudah, can you just decide that I'm going to bench now and then get up from my seat after benching, wash, say al netilat yadayim? I just washed my hand before. How can I say al netilat yadayim? And how can I say another hamotzi? I'm causing a bracha that's not necessary. So that's not a simple task. Hence, the Magen Avraham, others, they write a person should be mafsik between the two seudot. You should divide the two seudot in a way that you have a halachic pause in between. What's considered a halachic pause? You get up, you go outside the house for a stroll in the street, and you come back. That's a halachic pause. If you're not going out of the house, it becomes more of a question of the time lapse. So a person should be discussing that with their local More Hora'ah, as this has complexities. When this becomes a very relevant question is on Shavuot. Because Shavuot, there is a minhag to eat milchiks. And the reason for it, of course, is that there was multiple different reasons brought in the poskim, either because dvash v'chalav tachat leshonech Torah is nimshela lechalav, which is the source, the life source of a baby is the milk, or because when they came back from Matan Torah, there's nothing else available for them. All the meat pots and meat themselves were not shechted properly because they didn't have the mitzvot, and therefore they were all treif. The only thing you could have that was kasher is milk. So maybe that's why the minhag has evolved to have milchiks. Be that as it may, there's a legitimate minhag to have milchiks on Shavuot. But on the other hand, the Gemara says, mitzvah of simchat Yom Tov, en simcha ela bebasar v'yayin. You have to have meat on Yom Tov meal. Now, Shulchan Aruch does not paskin the chiyuv of meat; it only brings the wine part. But nevertheless, this is something legitimate as well, which people try very hard to do, to have meat on every Suda of Yom Tov, especially the Suda of the morning of Yom Tov, because it's Korban Shlamim, it's Basar Shlamim, and so on. This Korban Shlamim was brought in the day. So some people have one Suda of Shavuot Milchik, the other one's Fleishik. Some want to make sure that every Suda has Fleishik, but they also want to do the Milchik. So what do? The Suda of the morning of Shavuot, they divide. They have a Milchik Suda first, then they wash their hands, their mouth, they say benching, they clean the table, they take off the tablecloth and all that, and right away they continue the Suda with a full-fledged 5-course Fleishik Suda. So how is that possible? This is basically the same thing, and there you find this whole machloket evolve again, of how to halachically pause between the two seudot in order to make sure that you're not considered a gorem lebracha she'ena sricha, causing an unnecessary bracha. Especially for Sfaradim, this is a much bigger deal, because Rambam holds that causing an unnecessary bracha is equivalent of bracha lebatala, of a bracha in vain, which is a transgression of a full-fledged deoraita. And Shulchan Aruch paskins like this Rambam, not like the Tosafot, who the Ramah and the Ashkenazim subsequently follow, but like the Rambam, who holds this is a biblical transgression. So therefore you have to be more careful, and a person should discuss this with a proper Moreh Hora'ah, especially for Sfaradim, should be a person, a Sephardi Moreh Hora'ah, someone that's familiar with these halachot, which again differ a little bit between the Sfaradim and the Ashkenazim. Says the Shulchan Aruch in Seif Dalet, Ein tzarich lekadesh b'seuda shlishit. No kiddush necessary in seuda shlishit. The reason for it, the Mishna Berura explains, is because unlike the morning that you say kiddush, and seuda shlishit you don't have to, because we compare the kiddush of the night with the kiddush of the day. And we say, just like at night you only need one kiddush, during the day also you need only one kiddush. It's not that every time you have Seudah you should make kiddush. Now, the Ari HaKadosh, Marchur Chaim Vitali's student, writes in Shar HaKavanot also, that the concept of kiddush on wine does not apply, Kabbalistically even, to Seudah Shlishit. Is only for Seudah of night, Friday night, and Shabbat morning, not like the Rambam that holds that a person should say Kiddush. Rambam's Shita is a person should say Kiddush on Shabbat afternoon, Seudah Shlishit as well. But nevertheless, the Kaf HaChaim and many others say that Be'emsa Seudah, a person should be drinking wine. So you find many who follow the Kaf HaChaim, follow the writings of the Mikubalim, that they make a lachaim on a cup of wine or on some grape juice in the middle of Seudah Shlishit. That comes really from this. It's not just to do what Rambam says, which he requires a full kiddush before Seudah Shlishit, but it's really to do what the Kaf HaChaim says. This is Mazuz also in his Shelot Shuot that I have over here, Makor Ne'eman. He says the same thing as well. So, one last thing in this Seif Dalit that the Shulchan Aruch adds, "Aval sarich lipso al shtei kikarot," but you do have the obligation of shtei kikarot of lechem mishneh on Suda Shlishit as well. So even though that there is no kiddush necessary, but you do need lechem mishneh even on Suda Shlishit. And we mentioned before, and the Ramah says it here, that not only Suda Shlishit, but even if you decide to have an extra Suda, an unnecessary extra Suda, a fourth one, and it's still during Shabbat, you would need a lechem mishneh, a double bread, for that as well. Now, if a person wants to say Kiddush on Suda Shlishit and be Machmir for Rambam, is that considered Yuhara? Not necessarily. It's not considered Yuhara. Maran Bet Yosef writes in this Siman that the person that wants to do it, Hamekadesh lo yifsid. It's not a big deal. You could do it if you wanted to. That's the psak of the Matei Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda Ayash of Algeria. Excuse me. And there are those who say that, according to Arizal, this is not applicable, so therefore you should not be doing it. So whatever a person ends up doing, so long as it's done lishma and properly, it's fine. You have certainly what to rely on. Now, the Ben Ish Chai was asked in one of his responses in Rav Pa'alim, in Chelek Bet, it's printed in Siman Nun Dalit of the second volume of Rav Pa'alim, that the person that has 1 cup of wine available in Suda Shlishit, is it better to use it for a cup to say Birkat Hamazon, Kos Shel Bracha, for Birkat Hamazon, or is it better to drink it within the Suda to consider this Kabbalistic concept that we just mentioned? And the Ben Ish Chai discusses it, and he answers basically that, as you would expect, that the cup of Birkat Hamazon is more important. That's a full-fledged halachic concept, so therefore you should prefer to say benching on a cup of wine rather than just make a l'chaim and have wine for this Kabbalistic concept that we mentioned during Seudah. And that's what he says also in Ben Ish Chai, that even though that there's a mitzvah to drink some wine during the course of Seudah Shlishit, but nevertheless, the concept of saying Birkat Hamazon on the cup is more important, is a halachic concept. He brings a proof from the Gemara Masechet Yuma and so on. So therefore, that would stick as the final halacha. One more seif over here, seif Hey, says the Shulchan Aruch, Sarich la'asota bepat. The Suda should be done with bread. That means, don't just have some mezonot or some fruits and vegetables, some meat and rice. You should wash on bread, say hamotzi. That's the mitzvah of Suda Shlishit. Sarich la'asota. You must do it with pat. V'yesh omrim, but there are those who say, שיכול לעשותה בכל מאכל העשוי מאחד מחמשת המינים. There are those who say that you could do Suda Shlishit with any mezonot that will require ala michya afterwards with 5 grains. This is again the shita of the Rosh that the Tur brings as well. And says the Shulchan Aruch, v'yesh omrim, and there's a third shita, you could do it even with meat and fish and other things, but you can't do it with fruits. And the fourth and final leniency, this is the shita of the Ran in the 16th perek of Masechet Shabbat. The Ran writes that even with fruits and vegetables you could do Suda Shlishit. And the Shulchan Aruch, after bringing these 4 opinions, it says, Vesvara Rishona Ikar. The first thing I said, that it must be done with pat, with bread, is Ikar, and a person should do it with washing on bread, hamotzi, and eating at least the kazayit, but l'chatchila, kabetza of bread, unless you are really full and you can't really have it, or because of medical reasons, that for whatever reason you cannot have bread, or it's Erev Pesach, and after 6 hours, which is the time of Suda Shlishit, already you cannot have bread anymore. So you would have to have other things when Erev Pesach is on Shabbat. In that case, you could rely on the other leniencies, of course, hakal tchila, which means the more you could be stringent, the better. So if you could have chaveshet minim, if you could have mezonot, which is ala mechya, then you should have that. If not, you should at least have rice and fish and meat and those stuff. And if you really, really can't have it, and you just had a piece of fruit for Suda Shlishit, that also is considered acceptable in extenuating circumstances when push comes to shove and you can't really have anything else. And the Shulchan Aruch ends with Seif Vav, saying that Nashim Chayavot b'Suda Shlishit, women also have the obligation of Suda Shlishit, just like men do. And even though that, according to Rashbami Masechet Psachim, at the end, Arbe Psachim Daf Kufchet Amud Bet, turns to be that women should be patur from Suda Shlishit. We don't paskin like that. That there are others like Rashbam also, Rashi, Smak come out like that as well. But nevertheless, they are obligated. Shulchan Aruch says we paskin that the women are obligated to have Suda Shlishit. Chacham Obadia actually has a tshuva in Chelek Vav of Yabia Omer in Orach Chaim Siman Kafchet, that even though that it's not muchrach, and the women are obligated to have Suda Shlishit, but if they forgot Retzev Achalitzenu, for sure they don't go back to say even the bracha of Asher Natan. That means if a man forgets to say Retzeh, the halacha would be, if you say Baruch Atah Hashem Bonei Yerushalayim, so then you will say there, if you remember right there and then there is a bracha that you say to make up for a say that you didn't say, which starts with Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam Asher Natan Shabbatot Limnucha La'amo Yisrael Le'ot V'Librit Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Shabbat. That bracha that men would say if they forgot. Now, if as a man, you started the next bracha, you said Baruch Atah Hashem La'at Hakel Lavin, you started La'at, one word even, then you don't go back to say Retzeh either. But if you remembered after Bnei Yerushalayim, before you started the bracha saying the word La'at or Hakel, then you will say that bracha, a make-up bracha of Asher Natan Shabbatot Limnucha. But women, says Chacham Obadia, would not even say that bracha, because their obligation of Suda Shlishit is even more questionable than that of the man. Is Machloket Rishonim. But for all practical purposes, the Shulchan Aruch paskins that Nashim are obligated to have Suda Shlishit as well. We'll stop over here and we'll continue Be'ezrat Hashem in the next Siman Reish Tzadi Bet, in the days to come. Hazaku Baruch.